Hi, hello, welcome to the very first episode of First of All, harm reduction-based drug education for today's teens, parents, and teachers. My name is Sasha Simon. I am the Safety First Senior Program Manager at the Drug Policy Alliance, and I'm beyond excited to be able to share this content with a wide audience and to really be able to engage with a live viewership as well. So I hope we all have a lot of fun with this series. Uh, the purpose of the series and episode 1 in particular is to really help folks understand that abstinence-based drug education isn't working. In my work at the Drug Policy Alliance, I'm the Safety First Senior Program Manager, and Safety First Real Drug Education for Teens is our harm reduction-based drug education curriculum for 9th and 10th grade students. As a part of the Drug Policy Alliance's larger drug policy work, what was realized is the fact that a lot of our drug policies are created out of ignorance and stigma and a lack of education that's been passed down from year and generation after generation, and it's really not getting us anywhere. Prior to my work at the Drug Policy Alliance, I've been a longtime health educator and public health advocate, over a decade here based in New York City. And the tenets and the values behind Safety First is something I can really get behind as a longtime harm reductionist and public health advocate. So something to know is I used to teach high school. I used to teach 10th grade health here in the Bronx. And Safety First Real Drug Education for Teens is a harm-based drug education curriculum for 9th and 10th grade students. And there's a good reason for that. 9th and 10th grade they're the ideal grades that you give teens critical health information and in particular critical health literacy skills before they start to initiate any kind of risky health behaviors, so that they could be safe, so that they can know what their options are and make sound decisions, and know what decisions can be made before they enter into that risky situation and have to guess or check. It's also aligned with national health education standards as well as Common Core learning standards. And there's a good reason for that. For any health teacher to be able to use a health education curriculum, it needs to be aligned with national health education standards, which are set forth by the CDC, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. And that's just to make sure that you're hitting the right skill sets, that you're making sure that they're engaging with the right content that's going to make sure that they're healthy, not just within adolescence, but also into their adulthood. It's also aligned with Common Core learning standards because we wanted to give it a framework that already fit for how teachers teach, that are already within the standards that they have to meet to not only just make sure that their students are proficient in their subject, but also to make sure that their students are aligned across subjects. So we recognize that it really allowed a lot of interdisciplinary aspects of the curriculum. When we align with Common Core learning standards, it allows health teachers to be able to rely on strategies and skills that come out of English classes, for example. One strategy and one really cool technique that we teach students in the Safety First curriculum is called the CRAP test. CRAP is an acronym that helps students understand to look for the credibility in an online resource, the relevance of it, who is the author, what is their agenda behind all of it, and what is the purpose behind this piece of work that they put on the internet and what it is that they're trying to share with you. The CRAP test is actually something I learned about from an English teacher. It's a great acronym for students to be able to engage with, sources both online and in print, and then be able to come up with, a conclusion statement or some type of thesis statement that they can back up with facts. And that's, as many of you already know, that's a Common Core tested skill. So again, as much as possible, we really wanted to be able to tune into what teachers are already doing in the classroom, what they already find as great strength-based foundational skills that young people need to learn, and then just making them applicable to health literacy as they are. So Safety First does a few things. And you can see this, you can go anytime online. Safety First, I'm very proud to say, is available for free online at the Drug Policy Alliance's website. So you can go online, download it now, and take a look. And one of the things that's also available on Safety First webpage is our fact sheet. And you can see a whole lot about how it was developed, how we piloted it and evaluated it. We actually got to evaluate the curriculum twice to make sure this thing actually works. Once here in New York with one high school, and then in San Francisco with 5 different high schools back in spring of 2019. So we really did try to do our due diligence to make sure that this is truly an effective tool. I won't go into too much detail about that, but what I can say is that Safety First is designed so that students are empowered to use critical thinking skills to access and evaluate information about alcohol and other drugs. Again, being able to access and evaluate information is a skill that they're already being taught in schools. And something to recognize is that young people actually spend more time giving screen time than they do in schools. The average teenager, anywhere from ages 13 to 18, are spending about 9 hours a day online, engaging in entertainment media, and that's outside of any schoolwork that they're doing. So it's important to be real about the fact that the only place that they get their information is not school, it's not their teachers, it's overwhelmingly each other, and it's overwhelmingly the internet. So teaching young people how to access viable and reliable online resources is critical. Teaching them how to vet them is also critical. And I think, as a lot of people can see now that we are at home and we are isolated and we're trying to learn more and more about COVID and, the scientific developments and breakthroughs and new kind of, scientific discoveries we make every day about how it's spreading and how we can keep ourselves safe. We already know that there's a lot of confusing information, misinformation, and even if it's not misinformation, information changes, information evolves. And I would hate for any teenager or any person in general to really hang on to the information that they might have learned 20 years ago back in high school and say that's the only thing there is to know. Because if our scientists are doing their jobs right, our academics, our innovators, information is likely going to change. Innovation is likely going to disrupt, like we see with the case with vape pens now. And now we have to figure out how to teach kids again about nicotine and tobacco, and parse out the differences between smoking combustible tobacco and not combustible tobacco if you're using vape pens and e-cigarettes. And it's become a whole new world. And so parents have also seen the extent to which they now have to learn new things. Teachers have seen the extent to which they now have to learn new things and really be up to snuff so that they can keep up with this new generation and everything that they have that's surrounding them and everything that they're navigating. So it's our belief, and it's my belief, if you teach critical health literacy skills early, you don't then have to be an over-paranoid parent or teacher or adult trying to learn all of this, trying to master all of this, and trying to be an expert, because you've already empowered your child or your student to be able to do that for themselves, not only as a child, not only as a teen, but again, for the rest of their lives. So that was a lot for number one, but it's important. We have to be real about the fact that we're on the internet and we are online and we are looking for what we need to know about how to keep ourselves safe. So don't underestimate how important knowing how to vet online sources is for a teenager. Safety First also empowers students to learn decision-making and goal-setting skills that helps them make healthy choices related to substance use. And I'll tie that into the next point because there's something I'd like to share. And it's that Safety First also empowers students to develop personal strategies and social strategies to understand and manage alcohol and other drugs. The reason I think that third bullet point is very important is because it's important for us to manage personal strategies. I'll get into a bit more of the history of drug education here in the US and the abstinence-based approach that we've really adhered to. But what's problematic, there's many things that are problematic about an abstinence-based approach. But I think one of the main things that's most problematic is this kind of one-size-fits-all approach. And that's just not going to work. There's a lot of different reasons why people use drugs. There's a lot of different reasons why people use legal drugs, illegal drugs. There's a lot of different reasons why some drugs are legal and some drugs are illegal. But who are we to say how someone should cope, how they should manage their own drug intake? How are we to know what their own body chemistry is? How are we to know what best suits them? So it's really important that teens learn how to really have their own sense of autonomy and their own sense of agency when it comes to their own sense of health, because it is very much a personal connection, and teens very much need to be able to make their own individual and personal decisions and be able to look at the facts and face them for themselves, to be able to engage with a medical provider and be able to make those decisions for themselves. Beyond that, because oftentimes drug use, depending on the drug, let's say alcohol, for example, happens in social settings, we also have to understand how to communicate our own values, our own health needs to the people around us, and healthy ways to be able to do that. When you stick to an abstinence-based approach, when you say things like just say no, or you say things like you're too good for drugs, or you're too cool for drugs, what you then teach a young person is that I'm not going to be a good person if I admit to someone that I respect or I admire that I use drugs. And that's often a paradigm that we carry along into adulthood. We might open up about things like alcohol, for example, or maybe even cannabis. But even cannabis, we have it, legal for adult use in many, many states at this point. But some folks can even be a little shy about opening up about that. Oftentimes we have many employers who still, even drug test around that. And in many states, possession and use is still criminalized. So when you have that kind of pressure on you, I'm not a good person if I use drugs. I can go to jail if I use drugs. I can go to jail if I'm, in possession or if I'm using. How can I be open and honest about my use? And how can I also be open and honest about the resources that I need to understand, not just the risks that are involved, but also, what my doctor might be prescribing me, and what are my rights, and how do I understand the dose and the dosage that's being, prescribed to me, and does that feel right? And what does it mean for, my doctor to tweak those things? So it's very incredibly critical that young people individualize and own their own health so that they can make their own decisions for themselves. And doing this whole blanketed nobody should ever do drugs at any time in their life for any reason, that's just not going to work. And it's also just not real, and it's not practical. And we've got to stop lying to young people. In addition to that, Safety First empowers young people to understand the impact of drug policy on personal and community health. And, that's kind of typical of many subjects and areas within health education. Let's say sexual health, for example, comprehensive sex ed. You want a young person to understand the larger context of their community, right? Because we typically don't, sometimes we have sex with ourselves, but we have sex with each other. And it's that sex with each other that leads to the transmission of, STIs and different viruses. So it's important to understand the context in which you live, the resources that are available to you for testing, treatment, counseling, whatever it is that you need, so that you can get protection. And then you also need to know the policies that you're governed by. One thing that I think is really impressive about New York City is that young people have access to confidential health insurance as early as the age of 12. And that's just to make sure that there is no barrier, there's no deterrent, and no stigma in the way of them being able to access the reproductive health services that they may need if they're choosing to engage in that behavior. As we know, there's not a whole lot that we can do about controlling other people's behaviors, and particularly and mainly overly confident teens. So it's just important that we make sure that we have policies that really support their health and support their healthy decision making. So if you make sure that your health education actually lets teens know what's available and accessible to them, they can actually then go and access it, right? So Safety First also takes that same approach and make sure that students really consider what are the drug policies that they're being governed by. They already are. There's no drugs except those that are prescribed or over the counter that are legal for teens or for anyone under the age of 18. However, they're still governed by drug policy, right? If drugs, or let's say, for example, if cannabis is in the state that they live in, is illegal under the age of 21, well, that is a law that they are being governed by. Most, if not all schools, I want to, I think it's safe to say all schools have some form of school drug policy. And it's important to know what the drug policy is on their campus so they can understand what the consequences are going to be if they're caught using, selling, if a rumor gets out there. It's important to know what that is. So Safety First actually has them engage with their own school's drug policy. Take a look at it and assess, do they think that that's fair? Do they think that that drug policy is going to be helpful to themselves or to their friends or their peers if something happens, if one of their friends are using, if they know that their friend is having a hard time at home and they may be coping by, let's say, for example, smoking cannabis before school, and that becomes a disciplinary offense versus, what that child really needs support based on what's going on in their life, that becomes something that a young person can actually assess. And a young person can assess that because it directly impacts and affects them. So Safety First actually has them engage with concepts that actually impact them in real life. And so because of that, they also learn how to advocate for health-based drug policies. So right now we have a very zero tolerance, most schools have a zero tolerance based drug policy, meaning there's no tolerance at all for any type of drug use, which means that, even a first infraction can lead to heavy disciplinary action. You could be suspended, you can be expelled. And, and there's more than enough data that shows that keeping students away from their learning environment and their primary social environment does not help curb their drug use. It doesn't help curb the issues that may be underlying their drug use. So the whole punishment, disciplinary aspect of it, it doesn't actually work. It's not actually effective at getting people to, stop or curb their drug use. But health-based policies are, and getting a young person to really consider that they want to put their health first and their well-being first. They'll learn what a healthy balance is, and they'll learn how to make healthy decisions for themselves. So, a little background on drug education in the US. Abstinence-based drug education is the predominant model. It has been for decades now. I myself am a DARE baby. I don't know if you guys remember DARE, the bright red letters that go across your chest with the black t-shirt that you got. I don't know if you guys remember, if you do remember DARE and you were a DARE participant and you're a millennial, I do wonder if you remember what grade you would have been in whenever you DARE education. Well, I'll go ahead and spoil it. You were either in 4th or 5th grade. So you were either probably 10 years old. You had a local police officer come in and ask you to pledge to him or her that you will never, ever do drugs for the rest of your life, period. and here is a t-shirt, and here is some pizza, and don't ever do it. And for many of us, including myself, that was the full breadth of drug education they ever got. They just said, don't do it. Here's a t-shirt, here's pizza. Pizza will solve it all. And it didn't. That's not what happened. And we're at a point now where accidental overdose is actually the leading cause of death under the age of 50 here in the US. That may not be the case after this year, but that has been the case for the past few years. So there's a lie that we've been telling ourselves that, you know, good people abstain, and it's only the bad people that are using drugs. And that's one of those things that really has to end. And the lack of education and the overemphasis on shaming people and stigmatizing those people in those commercials whose brains are eggs that fry in frying pans that you don't ever want to, you know, become. Like, it's just not working. It's just not effective. And there's a good reason for that. The Reagans had a huge role in why we are both so undereducated when it comes to drugs, as well as overcriminalized when it comes to drugs. At the same time that you had this huge emphasis on the war on drugs, anyone who is selling or is considered to be a drug dealer or a drug user being sent to prison for these incredibly long sentences. A lot of folks still in prison from those sentences and things such as the Rockefeller laws. At the same time that you have that overcriminalization, that hyper-criminalization and almost kind of hyper-violent illustration and pictures, and especially, you know, Black men that would often be used, Black and brown men that were actually used as the image of folks who are, you know, using drugs and becoming violent and need to be sent away. At the same time that you have that going on, you've got Nancy Reagan that's like, you know, just say no. And I think a picture speaks 1,000 words. It was a cute slogan. It was really cute. It's really catchy. As you see, it fits on a jersey really well, and that's cute. However, that is not effective public health policy. That is not an effective way in which children how to take care of themselves for the rest of their lives. So you see decades later now, we see decades later now that combination of the war on drugs and feeling as if we were justified in some type of way in stripping people of their lives and their rights and their sake to their right to their own sense of dignity and autonomy, by throwing them away. At the same time that we're justifying that to ourselves, we're also justifying lying to children about the fact that, you know, drugs exist in the world and people use them, and even good people use them. So there's been a lot of lies, quite honestly, and a lot of misinformation and a lot of undereducation that's happened around drug education. And that is why, among many other reasons, why we see ourselves in this predicament. And again, a lot of the purpose of creating Safety First was to give a richer, stronger, more comprehensive foundational knowledge base for young people so that we don't continue to perpetuate BS drug policies such as this. It's not sustainable, it's not economically viable, and it's not healthy. And we see a lot of that also being brought to our attention through, you know, everything that's being brought to light through COVID. In our incarcerated population. So we know that we can't just lock people up to solve a public health situation, crisis, or pandemic. We actually need to offer health-based services and health-based solutions to be able to navigate through, you know, the more problematic aspects of society. All right, so let me make this a little bit bigger. So let's just compare real quick to comprehensive sex ed, because a lot of times it's very difficult for folks to understand what a harm reduction based approach or what harm reduction looks like in a classroom in general, right? So let's compare it to comprehensive sex ed, which again, after over a decade of being a health educator, I understand comprehensive sex ed and comprehensive or harm reduction based drug education as the same thing. Again, it's all about being skills based and understanding that abstinence at all times among all people for their entire life is an incredibly ridiculous and unattainable goal. So comprehensive sex ed already recognizes that. In states where we do mandate comprehensive sex ed, we see the exact results that we want. We see a delay in teen sexual initiation. They wait to have sex. They're more likely to wait. States that mandate comprehensive sex ed, there's lower rates of teenage pregnancies and hence lower teen abortions, and there's higher rates of condom use. Those are all the things that you want as a teacher and as a parent. You want kids to wait as long as possible. And if they can't wait, you want them to be safe. You want them to know what they have access to actually keep themselves safe. And so we think that that same approach is going to be effective for drug education. And we also believe that that's going to be the wave moving forward. So what is harm reduction? Harm reduction is pretty simple. It's a set of strategies that encourages people to make the safest and healthiest choice they can based on their circumstances, not your circumstances, not your judgments, not your values, but based on their circumstances. And their circumstances could, include anything, include their own access to housing, their own access to healthcare, their own access to a quality doctor, what access to whatever drug supply they have. It's completely based on their circumstances. So what's important about a harm reduction based strategy or a harm reduction based approach to teaching young people is giving them a set of skills that they can use across circumstances, because as we know, as adults, circumstances change over your lifetime. As you know, there might be times where you're completely abstinent, you do no drugs at all. And then maybe at some point in your life, you drink alcohol. And then maybe at another point, you don't. Or maybe in some point in your life, you overuse and you develop a dependence on alcohol. It becomes some type of coping mechanism or a crutch, right? Or maybe not. That happens for some people, it doesn't. Again, harm reduction is the healthiest and the safest choice you can make based on your circumstances. It's not a one size fits all kind of thing. So these are the harm reduction strategies that we teach in the Safety First curriculum. First, abstinence, not doing it, abstaining. It is the safest choice that you can make when it comes to drugs. At the same time, it's also not the most realistic choice that you can always make. So, for example, if there is a patient who's dealing with a chronic illness or dealing with chronic pain, and cannabis is the most effective substance for them to be able to mitigate that pain, it is what it is. Even if it's not cannabis, if it's something, well, cannabis can be prescribed by a doctor, but let's say it's something that comes in pill form that's prescribed by a doctor, or some type of painkiller or opioid. Abstinence isn't always completely possible. And so that's something also just to recognize, is that there's a lot of different reasons why people use drugs, and it's not just because they're bad people. The next harm reduction strategy is to develop drug knowledge, learn some things, right? Again, we teach young people in the curriculum how to actually access and evaluate the credibility of sources so that they can have their own kind of in their own head, their own kind of encyclopedia of information that they can fall back on. And when you invest in quality educational materials that have already been vetted and are scientifically backed, then it makes it even easier for teens to develop drug knowledge. When it's taught in their health classes by their health teacher, it becomes even better. Dose and dosage, incredibly important harm reduction strategy. It's something that's important for teens to learn, both about drugs that could be prescribed by a doctor. What does the dose mean? What does the dosage mean? Is the dose and the dosage right for me? and how can I speak about that with my healthcare provider. And then also, which you'll see for folks who live in a state where, or even a country where cannabis is legal, you'll see the dosage, you'll see the dose or the serving size on cannabis products, especially let's say, like for example, an edible. You might say an edible chocolate bar that has different squares. One square might be 5 milligrams, and that might be your serving size. So it's important to know stuff like that. It's important to already have that kind of concept, be familiar with that kind of concept, so that you can know how to properly use drugs of any sort across the board. Start low and go slow speaks for itself, especially if it's something you've never tried before. Don't go balls to the wall. That's often what teens like to do, because I mean, you know, if they're using drugs because they're curious or they want to have fun, they want to feel the effect. However, that's not all that safe, and that often gets them in more precarious situations than they ever intended. So both for adults, it doesn't matter who you are. If you're taking a drug that's not prescribed to you, and you don't know how it's going to impact you, it's important to start low and go slow. Moderation is also important, cutting back if you already have heavy use, being mindful of your set and setting, which means your mindset. What kind of mood are you in? How are you feeling? What's on your mind? Are you feeling depressed? Are you feeling angry? Something got you riled up? Consider that. Consider that before you do any drug. Consider that before you have a drink or a few. Absolutely consider that before you have, let's say, for example, any type of psychedelic drug, because that's going to impact your experience and how the drug is actually impacting you. Also consider your setting. Are you in a safe setting? Are you around people that you know? Are you alone? Are you in an unsafe place? Like, for example, are you out in the woods, doing something you've never done before and by yourself? Is that necessarily the best? But that's up to you. But it's important to be mindful of set and setting and to create the best set and setting that you can. Check the substance. Drug testing is a thing. You can, not drug testing in terms of do you do drugs or not? Is it in your system after however many days or not? But is the substance actually what I think it is, right? You can actually check the substance. You can test the substance to make sure that it's actually what it's purported to be. Now, that's something to get into at a later time, but drug checking and drug testing becomes possible with drug policies that allow that to be possible, because often drug checking equipment and technology is often classified as paraphernalia, as drug paraphernalia. And so these life-saving devices can't be used. But again, drug checking and drug testing is an incredibly life-saving harm reduction strategy. And we need solid drug policy that makes that possible. Also, don't mix substances, either by label, doctor's orders, or just common sense. Don't ask your body to do so much. If you really want to make sure you're being safe, keep it simple. Don't do the most. Don't mix substances. Know how to respond to an emergency. I'll tell a story in a bit, but it's important to know ahead of time how you should respond to any kind of health-related emergency, and especially a drug-related emergency, as oftentimes folks become kind of paralyzed in the moment because they don't know what the law is around responding to a drug-related incident or accident. And they don't know if they're going to go to jail. They don't know if they're going to get in trouble. So it's important to know that. And it's important to know drug policy. What are you being governed by? An example that I give, especially for young people, because I live in New York, if a child graduates from high school and decides to move from New York to New Jersey, for example, they're governed by different drug policies. So it's just always important to just be engaged and informed about where you are, your geography, your region, your state, your municipality, whatever, even your own job, and know what the drug policy is, because it's not one size fits all. It's not standardized across the US at all. So it's important for you to take on the onus of knowing that as an individual. So just reviewing these strategies each very quickly. Again, abstinence, it's the safest choice when it comes to alcohol and other drugs. Just abstaining or not using. Same thing we tell teens when it comes to sex. Safest choice is to not do it at all, but I already know you're gonna do it. And I would be so bold to say in many ways, I already know you're gonna, try drugs at some point in your life. And I'm not just talking about the hard stuff and the things that scared us back in the 80s and 90s that they put in the commercials. I'm talking about alcohol, I'm talking about cigarettes, I'm talking about the really simple things that are in our day-to-day lives, vapes. Drug use happens and that's okay. But at the same time, abstinence is always the best choice. Well, so again, recognizing that it's not realistic to expect all people to abstain from drug use at all times for their whole life. Moderation encourages people to cut down on use if you recognize that it's becoming problematic on your body, on your wallet. Cutting back is always an option, and it's a good option. It's a viable option. Again, don't mix substances. Most drug-related injuries and deaths are a result of substance mixing. And it's hard to predict how different drugs are going to interact with each other. And it's hard to predict how it's going to interact in your own personal body. So again, that's why it's important to teach teens to have their own sense of autonomy and their own sense of ownership of their own body, so that they can know that just because one thing affects one person in one way doesn't mean that it's going to have the same impact on them. And that's something to be real about and to teach kids to be real about early. There's no reason for that to be a surprise late in adulthood. Again, start low and go slow. Use drugs at a low dose and a slow dosage. Again, this is if it's not prescribed to you. If you have a specific prescription and you should take this many milligrams, this often, take your medication according to your doctor's orders. But again, if this is something that's not prescribed to you or you're trying it for the first time, take a little bit and then wait to see the effect before taking any more. No drug policy, especially for teens. They have a lot at stake when it comes to drugs and drug use. There's academic harms to them for sure. Legal harms, social harms, and also emotional harms that can come from drug use. And they're also frequently related to drug policies. Some of the ones that I mentioned earlier, zero tolerance drug policies that suspend children or expel them and keep them isolated from their sense of school community. Those have particular harms on young people as well. So it's important to know drug policy, and it's important to know the rules and regulations about how they're manufactured, sold, and used, be that at school, be that at your job, your workplace, what have you. It's important to know the consequences for breaking those rules and regulations so you can know ahead of time what you're really getting into. Mindset and setting. Set refers to someone's thoughts and emotions, what kind of mindset they have going on. And then the setting refers to the physical and social environment that they are, and they're both incredibly important contexts to consider. And I'm sure you guys can think of a few different drugs for which that would be incredibly important to consider ahead of time. Again, I think it's important to teach kids this concept early. I think it's important to teach them this as teens, because I think often as adults, we learn these kind of things the hard way. We learn that we shouldn't be angry as hell and then, go on a bender. We find out the hard way that we can make really destructive choices if that happens. And then we have to work backwards through looking at those patterns and really kind of unveiling what was going on there. So teach kids early that their mindset, their mental health, and their own mental hygiene is important when considering whether or not to use drugs and how they're doing that. Again, drug checking. We're huge supporters of that at DPA, but drug checking, also known as drug testing, or adulterant screening. It allows users to get more information about what's in their substance. It won't tell you exactly what it is. It won't tell you exactly what it ain't, but it gives you a closer idea of, what is in the substance. If you're expecting to be using MDMA, you can test the substance and see, does this actually look as much as MDMA, or does it look like, something else? Am I actually getting the drug that, I've been told that I'm receiving? Is there actually going to be the impact on my body that I was told there's going to be? All of those are really important things to know. And especially now that we're living in the era of fentanyl-laced drug supplies, it's incredibly important to know what's in the substance that you're using. And, we're seeing fentanyl not just pop up in opioid supplies, but also in stimulant supplies and cocaine. So it's important to know that you can check the substance that you're going to use. And it's important to support drug policies that allow you to be able to. Develop drug knowledge, develop some know-how, develop some science-based facts, develop a whole library of that stuff. It's important for everyone to know about the basic effects, of drug use, of any type of drug, of that chemical compound, know about the risks, know about the benefits and the harms of drugs in order to make safer and healthier choices. Again, I said it earlier, but so much of the crappy drug policies that we have are based on the fact that folks weren't really taught anything. They weren't really given the necessary science that they needed to understand the true nature of drug use, drug sale, mental health. And we've really, again, passed down that just say no, criminalizing, and abstinence-based ideology. We've seen how those type of ideologies have actually ravaged our communities and our families. And again, we have no other framework to really work with. But by developing drug knowledge and by making that just baseline, making it a standard for folks to really understand drugs in a real way, helps us really develop more harm reduction and health-based drug policies. So I'm here for that. Dose and dosage. Again, I think this is very simple stuff, but it's incredible and can really just change how a young person engages with their healthcare providers or any type of substance that they might be engaging with, just knowing the concepts of dose and dosage. Dose describes how much of a drug is taken at one time. The dosage describes how often you're taking it, every 4 hours, every 6 hours in the morning. It's important for teens to know that, and it's important to really adhere to that and making sure that you're taking drugs that are prescribed to you at the dose and dosage that it is prescribed to you. Know how to respond to an emergency. Never be afraid to call 911 or seek medical help. And Good Samaritan laws protect people who call 911 for help. When I first started in my role at the Drug Policy Alliance, I was very, very early on, I want to say within the first few weeks, contacted by a parent. And that parent had just lost his teenage son to an overdose. He was still waiting on the toxicology reports, which take a few months to understand what was really going on, but he understands that it was an overdose. And his son was, again, I don't know which drug was being used, but his son was using that substance with 2 of his friends. And when they saw that his son was having an overdose, they were too scared to call 911. They didn't know what the repercussions would be for them, so they didn't call 911. And his son ultimately did die of accidental overdose. And that's a story that's always stuck with me and always been a big driver for me in this work, because I don't envy the position of that father of his son, and I definitely don't envy the position of his friends, who clearly, I think, cared about him. But that's an incredible decision to be forced to make in the moment. Life or death, your life, my death, your death, my life. Why put anyone in such a life or death decision-making type of space like that, especially a young person. So it's important that we support Good Samaritan laws that make it safe for folks to report drug-related incidences and to seek medical help. More importantly, I think it's important that we make sure that these type of laws exist. We make sure that young people know that we make sure that that they know that these policies exist, so they're not in the moment and make a messed up decision that potentially loses a life, ruins lives, and can really be very haunting. So some takeaways. What I'd like for you to take away today is that harm reduction-based drug education is better than abstinence-based drug education. Why is it better? Because you actually teach them skills. You actually recognize that a teenager is not always going to be a teenager. You actually recognize that life is long, ideally, if we do everything right. And they're going to have access to different things. Life is going to change. They are going to change. And they're going to try things and see things that we can't ever imagine. So abstinence among all people at all times is completely unattainable. We've yet to see any evidence at all of it being attainable. And it's one of those things we just got to let go. And especially if you're worried about the wellness of your child, if you really want them to never do drugs, it's important that you teach them a harm reduction-based approach, because even if they never ever do drugs, don't you want your kid to be that one that knows to call 911? Don't you want them to be the one that knows how to administer naloxone? And don't you want them to be the one that understands that, if someone has alcohol poisoning, they could, for example, vomit, and based on how they're laying, they could actually suffocate on their own vomit and die. That happens. But one of the things we teach them in Safety First is how to put another person in the recovery position so that they're laying on their side. So if they do end up vomiting, it goes out on their side and not in their breathing passages and not in their nasal airways. So again, even if your kid doesn't do drugs, even if you never do drugs, at least you're empowered to be able to save your own life or the life of someone that you care about. And it's important not to take that away from people. It's important not to stifle our own capacity to take care of ourselves and each other, just because we'd like to, have this one-size-fits-all approach of innocence, goodness, purity of non-drug use. It's not necessary, it's not realistic, and it's yet to be attainable. So, harm reduction-based drug education is better because it's actually real. It's based in reality and it's facts-based. So I want to thank everybody for watching episode 1 of a 7-part web series. Next week is all about how drugs work. Same time Monday. What day is that? April the 6th at noon Eastern Standard Time. I just want to thank everybody for tuning in. If you want to download Safety First now for free or learn more information, you can go to drugpolicy.org/safetyfirst. And I'm just scrolling through the comments real quick. I see a question here from Mary Lynn Kiefer. Sorry, Mary Lynn, if I'm saying your name wrong. But you asked the question a little bit ago. The question is, I'm in Canada and marijuana is now legal here. What are your thoughts on this? I worry for the teens here who now have easy access. I think that's supposed to say at a young age. Well, the great thing about legal marijuana is that there is no access at an young age. That doesn't happen. I believe in Canada, you have to be at least 21 to be able to smoke cannabis recreationally. So the laws are even tighter. They're even tighter. And the restrictions are even tighter actually when you legalize versus not, because kids can't get into a dispensary. They have to show a valid ID. They actually have to show their valid ID at many points within the process of even of purchasing cannabis. So, in my opinion, I've been across many different states doing this and doing this work. Legalization actually helps keeps kids safe because they understand what the rules are, because you've made it very clear. This is not for you, as opposed to like, this is not for everybody. And there's really not any, you know, any honest, good reason for that. But in Canada, kids can't get it. And I think that that's what's best. All right. Just want to thank everyone again. If you want to tune in next week, noon Eastern Standard Time, I'd love to get your questions in real time. And I hope you guys love our very first transmission of First of All. All right, till next time, everybody take care, stay safe, shelter in place, protect yourselves, be well, be good.